Thank you for joining us, John. Anyway,
Good morning.
I'm going to describe you as a digital agency genius running Greater Manchester.
Well, I did teach in secondary schools for 30 years, so I did some of that other stuff first, and then decided that I wanted to do something different with my life. But yeah, I'll take that title.
They've given worse introductions than that. That's a good one. So
Thank
tell
you.
us about Greater Manchester, what you're doing there then.
Oh, right. Well, since leaving teaching, I've done quite a bit of work with Manchester City Council and the Combined Authority, mainly on kind of work around digital skills. But that's developed recently with the launch of, probably people have heard about the MBAC, which is line of sight to good jobs locally. We've got an EMAC curriculum, which is way too academic for most kids. And if you look at the statistics, only a third of young people go on to university in Greater Manchester. So what that other 2/3 doing? We're still forcing them to do this really academic, narrow curriculum. And particularly around digital, we have problems around computer science. So the MBAC is various things. It's really good quality careers education. But the bit I'm working on is digital as a specialism, but also digital across all subject areas. And we're calling it digital agency, which, as you know, Matt, it's an idea which has been brewing in my head for some time. And it's employers coming into schools, working with teachers across the curriculum, live briefs, authentic learning, project-based learning, whatever you want to call it. The kids learn digital skills, but there's no point in kids learning a digital skill if they don't apply it, because you don't use it, you lose it, yeah? And then whilst the person from industry is in, they are kind of doing a bit around their spiel. So an example could be somebody from PricewaterhouseCoopers, they'll be coming into a school, working with a maths teacher, defining a problem. But during that time, they'll be talking about how they use Excel, the digital skill, in their role, project management or financial planning, whatever that is. So the kids get to see line of sight to good jobs. They learn the skill, they use the skill, they apply the skill. And that's kind of the essence behind it. And it's really exciting. It's going into, the pilot was originally just a small pilot of 5 schools in Manchester. So Manchester is an authority, yeah. But Manchester was so pleased with it, they've doubled the funding. So it's going into 10 schools for phase 1. We're going to learn from that, see how that's worked. And we've got some amazing projects from right across the curriculum: cookery, maths, English. We've got one in computer science because, we need digital agency and computer science as well. But we'll learn from that and kind of, pivot, evaluate, move on. And hopefully Andy Burnham will give me some more money to take it further.
We'll reach out to him afterwards. John, if I take it on a really simplistic level, we often talk about acquisition of skills on one hand, but the sense of many learners don't engage because they don't see a purpose or a relevance. So if we give young people skills and at the same time give them context and relevance, at the very simplest level, that's the recipe for giving someone agency. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, that word agency was... I went to talk to Nicola at the Combined Authority about 2 years ago, and we were talking about agency in young people. And I know quite a lot of multi-academy trusts are kind of talking about agency in a way you've just described now. We did some work in my last school there's a school in California called High Tech High. I know it's incredibly cheesy, but they do project-based learning throughout the curriculum, everywhere. I never got to visit the school. I was hoping through the project I might get a flight out there, but that didn't happen. But you go into the school and it's just displays everywhere, and particularly using digital. And kids are kind of using that project-based learning, applying it across the curriculum, and using those skills at that time to a context that they understand. But at the same time, there's all those other life skills: collaboration, teamwork, presenting. That's all going on there. And they do amazing work. And really brave work. I think project-based learning or problem-based learning became a bit of a swear word in the education community in the late 70s. And I think when the national curriculum came in, it just killed any kind of sense of that off. It has, and things do in education. Yeah. And going back to what employers want at the end of the day, do you know what I mean? We can't ignore that anymore. And those particular skills... And I think about my nephews and nieces and many, many, many godchildren that I seem to have acquired. The society and world that we're leaving them in, the problems that they're going to have to solve and deal with, the curriculum as it stands isn't helping. It's not going to help them solve any of those problems. Project-based learning, problem-based learning, and there is quite a difference between those two things. If we're honing those skills in school, then we're preparing them for that difficult future.
Yeah. Just on that point, and I'm sorry, Matt, for jumping in on a bit of a segue. There's been so much, and I try and acquire stuff for my newsletter each week around it, and you see PBL all the time. And often people interchange project-based learning, problem-based learning. In my simplistic brain, project-based learning gives young people a sense of actually trying to discover what the problems are they need to mitigate, as opposed to there is the problem, how might you tackle it? Is that too simplistic a separation of the two as you see them, John?
When the EEF, because the project was involved with High Tech High, the EEF, it was one of their really, really early calls for evidence, whatever you used to call it. And they came in quite early on and saying, you're doing problem-based learning, not project. And I think the reason why that was happening is, bearing in mind the 2012 national curriculum had just come in, the revisions to it. So teachers at the academy was working at, we'd only been open 2 years, and they didn't necessarily have the confidence in the national curriculum. So what they tried to do was bolt problems onto the curriculum, rather than actually stepping back and chucking the curriculum up in the air and saying, actually, forget maths, English, science, geography, all the rest of it. You can really do a cross-curricular project where you can do something. You can do English, geography with maths in there as well. And actually, it's the project which is important and not the subjects. But you can understand the context we're in at that time. We were still focusing. We were still measuring. Do you know what I mean? The curriculum. So actually, they assigned problems to curriculum areas, if that makes sense.
Just coming back to your initial 5 schools and 10 schools, John, in your first phases, how many businesses have you got on board, and have you looked for a variety of sizes and sectors?
Yeah. So that's a problem for the combined authority, and they're currently working on it. So we've currently got Microsoft on board. We've got PricewaterhouseCoopers on board. We've got a food nutritionist on board. So depending on the project that the school is, or the area in the school, the area in the curriculum the school has decided to land this. And some have done it in subjects, and some have stepped back and done it as part of, what do they call them? Breakdown days, where the curriculum's suspended for the day. We've got a special school that are doing it in PSHE because they've got some issues with kids having super rows on WhatsApp at the weekend. So they've decided to do it more around pupil voice and PSHE. So it does depend on what the school has said, but we're trying to match that with the best person from industry. It's a bit like a dating thing, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And coming at it that way. But so, yeah, you've got the food nutritionists as a standalone. They're like myself. They're a sole trader. They work for themselves. We've got the big guys in. We've got local people as well. So I think it depends on what the school wants to do to fit the match. And I think that's right, yeah?
Yeah. So is there the plans to grow it? And as it becomes more and more successful, the schools will have more and more days off the curriculum. I forget what you called them there. Sorry, breakaway days, was it?
It depends what the school wants to do. And for me, at the end of it, there'll be 10 case studies. There'll be 10 case studies published on GMAX, which is Greater Manchester Combined Authority's careers site. And in there, it'll be 2 pages. This is what we did. This is what happened. These were the outcomes. This is what the kids learned. And other schools can then see what's happened. They can share the case studies. Other schools across Greater Manchester can see it. Let's see. But for me, my head right now is about having a quality experience for those young people. Yeah. But at the same time, having some really qualitative outcomes. We've got to move away from these cozy kind of nice days and everyone patting each other on the back and a nice time. So what? We have to kind of help teachers teach their curriculum better through digital. And this is where I think it fits in with the curriculum review that's just closed. But also, young people come away with a portfolio of evidence to actually say, this is what we did. So Manchester have purchased Cloodle, right? Now, Cloodle is an online skills development portfolio. Yeah. It's been developed in Greater Manchester. It's global. It's used in schools in Australia, in the States, but it's a Manchester product. But the reason why we're using Cloodle in the first instances is just that, kids can upload what they did, and that could be a podcast, it could be a PowerPoint presentation, whatever it is. But they can peer assess, self-assess, teacher assess, and industry assess, right, that portfolio. And I'm loath to say it, but I will say it. You might remember the old purple record of achievements, right? Well, it's not that.
I'm just laughing, John, because in the previous podcast, I brought this up and said how the secondary school I was at focused on it. You must do this, you must do it. Never used it again.
Well, it's that, but what it should have been. Because if you can get an online digital portfolio of evidence which kids develop across the course of their schooling into secondary school, with a series of experiences with employers, developing skills, but also it is light touch assessed. I don't want schools and teachers to do anything more. They're that busy, they're that knackered, they're that, what's the word you used to say, screwed. In that sense, we don't want to tighten that screw anymore. Do you know what I mean? We have to help teachers. I said to Andy Burnham when we first decided to do this project, he said, line of sight to good jobs. I said, right now, this is about helping teachers deliver their curriculum better. The situation they're in right now, before any Labour policy can kick in, right now we have to help teachers in schools because it's really, really tough out there. And if we can help them their curriculum better through digital skills and help them understand that digital is that enabler, not just for the young people, but for teachers as well, we're on to a winner. And I'm just going to add at that point, one of my last roles was the skit in the school I worked at. And I think the teachers coming into schools now, young teachers, they did the MBAC. They went to university, they came out the other end, and they don't get digital in a way perhaps a previous generation might have done. They are not digital natives. They are digitally defunct, if anything. And do you know what? It's not their fault. It's not their fault the situation has arisen. So they can consume digital. They can scroll endlessly and consume. But for them to take digital and create new content, resources for a lesson or whatever, they don't have that skill. And I say it's not their fault, it's not criticism of them. But I think this will enable them, this project will enable them to understand how digital can support their curriculum, whilst at the same time young people develop skills and have a line of sight to good jobs. I'll now start breathing again.
John, there's lots to unpick there. And we've seen time and time again this conversation about digital skills, both for learners and for the next generation of educators, that hasn't been a sufficient part of that training and recognised as a really important part of the toolkit. When you're working with Manchester, and I can declare I sit on the board at Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Mayoral Authority, another combined authority, have they connected the dots or joined the dots in the nature of our podcast that this, if they have aspirations of growing the economy of the region and growing that net value add for the region, this is how you prime the pump, by getting the workforce that they need to support that growth from in region rather than from outside the region?
Absolutely. And if Andy Burnham was on the call now, he'd be talking about the MBAC, and it does exactly that. It's about engaging employees in the curriculum. It's about line of sight to good jobs. And more importantly, it's almost about devolving the curriculum locally so it can actually meet the needs of that local economy. That implies you can imagine devolving the curriculum across the whole of England. What a mess that would be. But elements of it need to be, because I think that there's no point teachers kind of teaching in isolation anymore. We've got to move away from that idea of the pedagogue at the front, giving knowledge, kids remembering, regurgitating in an exam. It doesn't help the local economy, and it certainly doesn't help those young people get good jobs, locally. So we have to kind of understand that. And I think the Combined Authority Manchester, they do get that. That's what the MBAC is about. That if you Google MBAC and click on images, the first thing that comes up is this circle. I won't bother sharing my screen, but that is the first year of the MBAC, and it explains the digital element of it, the careers element of it, quality work experiences, not just 2 weeks. All a 2-week experience tells you is a job you don't want to do. It's quality work experiences from year 7 up to year 11, really thinking about all those diverse areas, those growing sectors within a region, a city region, wherever it is, Peterborough, wherever, Cambridge. It's kind of it's looking at beyond that, so that kid in year 7, what they think about what they might want to do when they leave school, they understand how that might have changed and shifted by understanding those experiences. I remember at one point when I was in third year at school, I was a bit of a train spotter right at school. I wanted to be a train driver. I thought, I want to be a train driver, because one of my dad's mates, who was a local councillor, had driven when I was 11 over the Ribblehead Viaduct with my feet on the 10 bands pedal. And I remember being so excited about that. That was an experience. But actually, in terms of me moving forward, do you know what? If I'd become a train driver, probably I'd have a better salary now. They earn loads, don't they? But in terms of me then and who I was, and then how that kind of shifted towards doing a computer science degree, because in the late 70s, early 80s, Margaret Thatcher was closing everything. And so I thought, well, the future's computing, because every generation thinks that, don't they? I kind of shifted my ideas. And I think if a portfolio of evidence helps a young person, or a child, then a young person, think about the future and what they're doing and how the curriculum is relevant to them and what they're doing, and meeting people and understanding their experiences. The only adults young people meet are teachers, and they're not great proponents of general. The great proponents of becoming a teacher. Most teachers haven't worked in industry. Do you know what I mean? They've gone through the system. Not their fault, but yeah.
When you started it, John, did you find schools reluctant to sign up to it, just knowing accountability issues, Ofsted and Progress 8 and the pressures on that? Or were they quite keen?
Honestly, the 10 schools in the 2 phases, once they understood it was about helping the curriculum and helping teachers teach better, they were totally on board. They understood.
Brilliant.
They got it. And they know that we're calling them pioneers because they're the first people to do it. And they know that there's a lot of people looking at this. Skills England, the new organisation that the government have set up. There's a lot of people looking at this piece of work. And I think, we'll make mistakes. I know that. That's fine. But it doesn't matter. And I think the main thing right now is about thinking how it can inform that evolution, not revolution, that the government are talking about. They've talked about oracy, they've talked about digital skills across curriculum, and I think this is a model that they could use, or a version of it, which could be used elsewhere. And do you know what? It's not expensive to do, because you build capacity in the system, you develop the relationship between the teacher and that industry. That it's not just a one-off. This is a longitudinal thing for that industry, that person, to develop a longer-term relationship with the school. And you'd hope to think that in subsequent years, even more projects will be flourishing and developing. I think what you need to do each year is to quality assure them and ensure that they were happening. But once teachers get into this idea of building a project with somebody from industry, the sky's the limit. Once they've been trained to do it, they'll come up with loads of ideas. They don't need me there. My job is to do myself out of a job here. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting, because I was going to say, so if you're listening to this podcast and you're in another region, maybe even in another authority in the same way like Manchester, and you think, you know what, that makes a lot of sense. We haven't got something like that and we should have it. How transportable is the concept? Is it something that you would work with different system leaders around the country on, John?
Absolutely. More than happy to do that. But I don't, it's a process, not a thing, if that makes sense. So, all the resources, the case studies will be available free. Do you know what I mean? The resources on there in terms of the planning documentation and so on. There'll be some podcasts in there. There'll be some evaluation suggestions in there. They're all going to be available. Do you know what I mean? It's not. I don't want this to be something that I then do ad infinitum for the next few years of my career. Do you know what I mean? I want this to be shareable instantly, because I think the issues are out there and we quickly need to resolve them. We can't allow only, the 2/3 of kids in Greater Manchester to not be going on to higher education or to not understand the pathway that they want to go on.
There's a lot of clarity there, though. But I mean, I always come back to, often one of the challenges is nobody likes to be the first to try something, whereas actually that's obviously the spark of innovation. But with what you're doing in Manchester, there becomes a perfect case study, evidence-informed, if you like, that this is a model that could be replicated, whether the same or in a nuanced way, around the rest of the country. But it requires somebody to not just package it up, but particularly when you're dealing with local authorities, combined authorities, there isn't necessarily immediately the intrinsic understanding of what that looks like from both sides. So it's how you present that as something that's okay. There's a cohesive plan that we have the confidence that we can enable.
There was a pilot for this before COVID. So a piece of work I did with the Combined Authority was around computer science, because computer science then was not, the NCCE hadn't started yet, and we did something called Bringing the Curriculum to Life, and it's basically this, but in computer science. So it was looking at the areas of the curriculum that were difficult to teach. So things like networking protocols, things like the Computer Misuse Act, and other areas of that curriculum. And we actually tied in industry developing problem-based learning with computer science teachers. And just an example of that was my old school, after it left. They had quite a lot of EAL kids in the exam. They weren't good at looking, those exam questions where they have to look at the bunch of code. There's a page of code in the exam in paper 2, and they have to kind of go through and unpick it. They found that incredibly daunting, so they actually set a challenge. This guy called John from Farm Digital, he came in, he'd set up this Liverpool tourist website. So it had, Liverpool Football Club and all the other things on it. And he came in and said to the kids, someone's hacked my website. And the weather was Manchester, and they put Man City in there and all sorts of other things. And he was sort of shouting at the kids saying, my website's being hacked and you're supposed to be looking after it. And anyway, the kids took the code from that site. They put it in what did they use? GitHub, that was it. They took the code, they downloaded it, they shared it, they found the errors. They were doing Scrum methodology, so they were reporting back at the end of each session on what they'd done and what they'd learned. Kids had certain roles. So we have trialed this prior to COVID, and we know it works in computer science. So that's why I know, and you can tell my enthusiasm wasn't for the subjects. I know it will work. But to convince other people, we'll need the case studies. It needs to see one in maths, in English, in geography, whatever. So then it becomes, in your words, Al, transportable, definitely.
Though, is it that concept of rather than giving you a page of code and saying spot the errors, to put it in the context of a real world problem, it suddenly becomes much more of an engaging and a stimulating piece of work and time for a child to actually look for. I mean, obviously, some children, you set them one task to find the error, and what they'll do is they'll come up with a list of improvements as well, and that's the bit where you don't want the cap on learning, if you like.
And for those particular kids, you're right. That question on paper 2 in computer science is worth about 8 marks. It's a big chunk of a question. So if they look at that text and start to have, wobbly knees in the exam and it starts to go wrong, that can make the difference of a grade. But you can see in that particular example how the person from industry directly involved themselves in the curriculum of a particular issue with the needs of those particular kids in terms of solving the problem. Honestly, it was brilliant. Going into one of the sessions and seeing the kids work. There's about 20 kids working in tribes, they were calling them, tribes of 4 or 5. And the nerdy kids coding, the others doing the presenting, somebody watching the time. It was all in there. They never do that in computer science lessons normally. It just doesn't happen. They're not allowed to. But, you do that with kids and do that. It's that authenticness, isn't it? It's that authentic kind of challenge. And it's all time. They know they've only got another 10 minutes to do it. All of that stuff is what they enjoy. Just to sort of come in on one thing, when the EBAC was first announced in 2012, I was really concerned that the response by the left could be, you've got an academic curriculum, let's bring in vocational. And then you've got O-level CSEs all over again. So I was really worried that the response could be that. Now, what we're doing in Greater Manchester, we're not getting rid of the EBAC because schools are still being weighed, measured, under the cosh with the EBAC. It is measured, isn't it? But if you can reconfigure the EBAC so that kids can see the vocational pathways, T-levels, or indeed BTECs, because they're not going away now, hooray. You're actually helping kids through that difficult 2 years of a really academic time, which is really stressful for a lot of them as well. Yet you're enabling them on that pathway through to the right qualification and into good jobs locally. So I think that's where the digital agency bit fits within the MBAC. It's that bit around technical vocational education, but currently, right now, within a very academic thing. And they're not going to change the curriculum anytime soon. It's not, that change won't happen quickly. So that's why this has taken a lot of thinking to basically help teachers. That's what it's about.
Brilliant. Can I ask you about something else, John, that you've mentioned to me? I worry about the kids here because teach lots of digital skills. We're very lucky. We have a Pete Rafferty comes in every week. Secondary school stops around here. There's nothing digital agency, as you would refer to it, and things. But I worry about my parents and things like that, who have no digital skills and are in a society which is increasingly dependent on having some, isn't it, really, whether it's for banking, shopping, whatever. Am I right that you went to New York because they've opened 10, 20,000 centres where people can go for digital skills?
No, that's right. I'm not at liberty to talk about that just yet.
Oh, right.
Because of sensitivity. But
we'll cut that out then.
No, what it is, across the borough, they've got these. Do you remember back in 2000, they opened up the UK online centres across the UK? So the UK online centres were Learn Direct, and City Learning Centres, where I worked for a bit, they became part of that that space. What David Blunkett did at the time, he took some of that money and said, rather than it just going into the community, let's associate it with schools. But you're right about parents. What it is they've got these essentially UK online centres across the borough there. And I've just been doing some support in terms of what they could be from an education perspective, as opposed to just families and people coming in off the street learning digital skills. Does that make sense? Because actually we know family learning is far more enriching than somebody just learning a digital skill. So, it's parents learning alongside young people as opposed to just parents. But more on that later.
We've been doing some projects recently across our region, which is about regenerating some of the rural towns. And we all know there's a kind of a move to retail to the peripheries and the outskirts often of towns. And actually some of those spaces which traditionally get converted into coffee shops and other things in the high street provide perfect potential for hybrid fluid spaces that we can use for adult education at all different levels, as well as at the earliest stages, perhaps filling the void by the, I'll say it out loud, the daft decision to get rid of our Sure Start centres, but the places where families at all ages and stages can come together for support. And of course, as well as access to services, we know those digital skills isn't just career-wise, it's often about how you can seek support and engagement with all the services that a country has to offer for families and much more. And so I think all paths with digital, it's not just about economic value, it's about social capital as well and social agency.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I mean, just going back to digital agency, one of the things that Nicola wanted from the Combined Authority said, how can we involve parents? And so what we're saying to schools is if at the end of their project, they can present back in some way to parents or have a stall, a parents' evening or something, we're mindful that we need to do that as well, because you're right, it's not just about the young people, it's also about, particularly the schools in Manchester, where I've worked, some of the highest poverty indices in the country. Okay, that's not a rural community, it's a different kind of poverty, admittedly, Al, but the idea that you are involving your community in this, and it's not just the school and the kids, it's wider than that. I think there is, we did look at putting this into Wigan, right, which is one of the 10 boroughs in Greater Manchester. And Wigan's really interesting because it's got the small little mining villages, which are no longer, there's nothing there. The villages, but with deprivation, kind of Lee and playground there. And again, that's a deficit model, me talking about that in that way. I'm sure those people from those communities would probably disagree with me, but it's how you could land that in a different area of Greater Manchester and support those communities more widely. I think you're right. Wigan was really interesting because they've never closed any libraries at all under austerity, because they knew that they were dropping in the new universal credit. Wigan one was the pilot areas in the country, and they were so worried because of the deprivation, because it was all done online, so they kept the libraries open so people could actually claim what was duly theirs. So I think there's a model there that you could take some of this agency. I was talking to Sherelle, who heads up Manchester's digital strategy, the council, and about how digital agencies for communities as well. So it's people in someone with a cold there. They got agencies, not just young kids. Everyone's got agency. Don't learn the skill. If you're somebody who, I don't know, living in a particular area of the country, and it's about finding the skill that helps you in your life at that moment in what you're doing. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
I love that, because it's just people always think of trying to narrow things into a box of what skills, whatever they may be in the context.
Just one other thing. Did you know people need to know about the AI progression tool that I went to John Chippendale at TeachMate AI and I said to him, you need a progression tool. It's something I've developed with quite a lot of edtech companies in the past. And it's basically it's a spreadsheet with some statements and schools fill in where they think they are. And I met with Karen and Lindsay, who are their kind of their ambassador community people, over the summer. We've developed this model. It's free. It's got the government's pillars of what AI are about. It's got a whole section on productivity. It's got an AI curriculum, and it's got one on teacher professional development. And it's just statements. Emerging, developing, secure. It's available on their site. You don't need to buy TeachMate AI to use it. It's just something that I was getting increasingly frustrated over the summer of that. There's a lot of noise about AI, and there's a lot of really scared leaders out there who don't know what to do. And so I said to John used to work just up the road from the CLC where I worked. So I've known John for a long time. I just said, look, let's develop this model. It'll help schools at least know where they are on the next steps on their journey with AI. It doesn't tell them how to do it, but it's a snapshot, if you like, and hopefully could help develop a strategy. So that's on TeachMate AI's website, and it's free. And I just, whilst I've got a voice here now, I just wanted to let people know about that, because I think, the schools I work with, as I say, as leaders, just need all the help they can get. There's not much help coming from elsewhere right now. There's a lot of noise, and I think this is just about...
The fear you mentioned, John, in schools, though, is why most schools are banning AI and banning technology, which is the wrong approach, in my opinion, but I understand why a lot are doing it. But if they were schools like this, maybe they'll engage more and learn to use them and teach how to use them safely, which has got to be a priority, surely.
I think for me, all the friends... Sorry, I'll go.
No, I'll just very quickly say, I think it's an interesting one that on many of these topics, and AI, you're absolutely right, John, it's kind of filled the news and the airwaves, and I see, looking at articles, there's really polar perspectives rather than recognising the kind of the nuance, and there's certainly no panacea in there that's going to magically fix anything. But I think we tend to treat, in a way, adults, when it comes to building our confidence and decision making around the adoption of tools or approaches, I always see we seem to apply a very different approach to the way that we communicate to our learners in the classroom. We almost have this disconnect between adults and young people. This idea that actually you don't take something for given. We want you to develop an understanding so you can make an informed judgment. You're going to try and set some expectations of how it's relevant, how might you measure its purpose and impact. And I think frameworks that prompt the questions, the have-yous, the next step, for me is always the pathway, because ultimately it's all about, I try and do it in my books. I don't give people the answers. I give them the things they should think about, because their answer will be different to the school next door and the school next door to that. It'll be a different time when it's right for them, or maybe it never will be right for them, depending on where they're at. So I'm always just wanting to tie that in, because I'm always a big fan when people say, let me give you the thought process. Let me get you to sit down and answer these questions. Have you done these things? Have you thought about? And then that empowers people to say, we're not taking away from educators. We're allowing you to use your professional judgment. We're just helping you frame the judgment that you might take.
Absolutely. And do you know what I'm calling that from the new year? I know we're not supposed to talk about the new year until after Christmas, but somebody who works with Jamie, Haujo Singh, he's talking about radical honesty, right? Teachers are radically honest in the classroom about the facts that they pass on to young people, right? I think too often with AI, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors going on. There is a lot of, it's all about me and my podcast and what I'm doing, and not that radical honesty about really how it can help teachers. And I think that framework for me is exactly that. It helps somebody be radically honest about where they are and where they need to be, and help them in the next steps of the journey. I just think sometimes, so I've got a dog that's showing off over here in front of me, she's making me laugh. There's exactly. Stop it. She's literally. She's like, you're being boring. But yeah, it's that honesty around kind of where we are with EdTech and where we need to be. And I think too often with EdTech, there's too much flim-flam stuff around the edges, and people don't actually nail it down and be really, really honest about what it can do and where they are and what they need to do next. I think that's important.
Amen to that. You are, yeah, I can't disagree. And actually, you know what? if people were more direct and honest, and if we did nail down where it genuinely has impact, actually it would benefit whatever side of the fence you sit on, because people would build confidence in the right tools, and it's confidence that drives you to take risks and try new things. And then that's the spark. We've talked about in a previous episode, education has a knack of knocking out of you the desire to make mistakes and try things, because you don't get a score for that. And yet the most successful things when it comes to moving forward as individuals is those failures that are your stepping stones to learning and success, and the same is with technology. Don't try things with the expectation it's guaranteed to work. Try it to see whether you can confirm that it's not right for you and your setting. And it doesn't help because it's such a fast pace at the moment, and none of us can keep up with the learning journey on what's happening with technology right now.
What else have you been talking about on these podcasts? Is it kind of a whole range of ed tech? Is it, just out of interest?
Mainly Cumbria, to be honest. Matt keeps jumping in and saying he wants to talk about apparently it's going to be the new capital of the UK. Matt's put a bid in to make it and recognise. There's a common theme, isn't there, Matt? Every episode, what's cropped up on every single...
There's a few common themes, yeah. It's, today's been quite interesting because we had a VC CEO and founder on this morning. And then we had Martin Collins, who ran the Brilliant Festival, so we're trying to do different people, John, because I think there's a lot of valid different people doing brilliant stuff that could help join the dots, if you like. But shouting loudest or well known as others. But actually, loads to learn from them.
But the common theme has been not a dismissal, but a recognition that the formal paper qualifications through our schooling journey have less and less value over the soft skills and the universal human skills that employers want. And that as we move to an ever digital world, those soft skills, human skills become more and more important and relevant, which ties in with agency, because it's digital skills that process encourages your critical thinking skills, checking the authenticity, trying, failing as part of your project-based learning. It's all about building resilience, and we want innovation and imagination and curiosity, and the list goes on. But it's been a common theme that no matter where you sit in the ecosystem, we're constantly at the moment amplifying the importance of our most human skills.
I think there's been a recognition. Sorry, John, go on.
There's that whole thing, isn't there? Of one thing I met with Mandy Corcoran, who's the Director of Education for Manchester. They've got the Skills for Life agenda, and she gave me this leaflet about 5 years ago before COVID, and it's got collaboration, teamwork, problem solving. I said, "Where's digital?" She went, "That's separate." No, digital is actually the rocket fuel behind all of those, right? So communication, email, Teams, that's the rocket fuel. Collaboration, using Netbook LM or a Google document or something. That's it's digital is the rocket fuel behind it all. And if we see it as this separate silo, no, do you know what I mean? It's inbuilt. It's throughout the whole thing. So important. They never changed their leaflet. It's still got 5 things on it, but yeah.
I think there's been a recognition now as well, hasn't there, that the education system is not fit for purpose. It needs a lot of changes.
It does, but I think, going back to what Al just said before, Matt, I think teachers now, because they've come through having done the EBAC, like I said before, and gone to university and all the rest of it, they're invested in the EBAC. There's so much work gone into it over the past 10 years. I think there's a lot of reluctance to move away from it. And you hear, you mention coursework and people start swearing, saying, "Oh, we can't do that anymore. It was really hard," and blah, blah, blah. So there is a big persuasion piece to do here in terms of moving away from that high stakes testing academic curriculum. I'm not saying I agree with it at all, but I think we've got a real job on our hands to have a really compelling model of something different, or a hybrid, or whatever that might be. I believe Australia are doing some interesting work around, exams and skills, but I don't really know much about it. But I've read stuff. But
I know someone I can put you in touch with, John, who's just gone out there for a month and was fascinated by what they do. He's got grants. He's off to California next, I think, to look at what they do.
There's lots of changes around the world. There's so much that people are looking at, from collapsing the traditional education model to blending the different subjects into more real world scenarios, to looking at age and stage and what is a valid credential. And you're right. I think for many, the problem comes when the system says we want to change something, but there's no funding or capacity put in the system to expect educators, like anybody in any profession, to have the capacity to retool, reskill, readapt. And that's only when we tinker at the edges with certain projects. When you look at a full reform of education and what that might mean, I think the first hurdle we'll get over is the education community having confidence that their voice will actually be heard, and that they won't be a case of we're going to bring you in the room once the draft is complete and just get an evidence that you've all seen it. And I think that sense of not always feeling heard is one thing that really limits the ability to build confidence and change. I'm conscious of timings on this recording, so I think it links in with one of Matt's proposed questions he was keen on when we very started drafting this, was the old kind of magic wand moment of if you could change one thing, or if you have the power to do something. So it seems rather apt, John, given the breadth of your experience and involvement. If you had a magic wand, what would be your one priority that you'd change in the education landscape?
Enable teachers to collaborate and share and solve problems together. I don't think that's hard to do. They need time to do it.
Time and money.
But get them out of the mats, get them talking across more, and just actually give them permission. Give them permission. It's surprising, if you give people permission, how they respond. Very quickly, during COVID, I set up one of the first mutual aid groups in the country, and a load of people copied. And everyone said, is it command and control? Have you got a team of people doing prescriptions, doing old people's shopping? I said, no. We've pushed it out into communities. We've got people to set up WhatsApp groups, street by street. They've got their own WhatsApp group. They come to us centrally for advice and support. They get on with it. You give people permission in any situation, they will rise to that challenge. At the moment in schools, because everything is so locked down and observed and measured and all the rest of it, no one has permission. No one's allowed to do anything. If teachers want to do something completely bonkers in the curriculum, they probably have to write a 10-page document and go and speak to governors about it or something. So if you give people permission, I think you'd be really surprised what they came back with.
I love that. Well, I think Matt and I can give you permission to please keep doing what you're doing, just more of it wherever you are.